Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're joined now by businessman and Democratic presidential candidate Tom Steyer, who is also in Las Vegas this morning. Good morning to you.
How are you doing, Margaret?
Very well. I want to know how you're doing out there in Nevada. What will constitute success for you in that caucus?
Look, I want to come in first or second. I've spent more time in Nevada than any other candidate. We have a great team on the ground here. I've gone out of my way to try and make sure that I see as many people face to face. And I believe we're putting together the kind of coalition in Nevada and in South Carolina that a Democrat's going to have to put together to win in November of 2020.
Nevada is a caucus state. Do you have confidence that you won't see a repeat of what happened in Iowa?
Well, yesterday was the first day of early caucusing, Margaret, and almost 12,000 people showed up. I think that it seems in good shape, and we're confident that it's going to work here.
All right. I want to ask you, you indicated you're also focused on what happens next at the end of the month in South Carolina. You've been investing a tremendous amount of resources with ad dollars, with your time, with your campaign there. Why are you so focused on South Carolina? Do you see that as sort of the final test of your campaign?
Well, let me say this. I am really focused on Nevada and South Carolina, Margaret.
Sure,
I think these
but you've got
two...
the largest state operation of any candidate out in South Carolina, and I think your wife just moved there. You seem to be all in.
Look, we are really serious about South Carolina. We are really serious about Nevada, and I want to make a point. Both of these states are diverse states. Both of these states reflect the kind of diversity that is America and that is the Democratic Party. And I think whoever is going to be the candidate has got to be able to show that he or she can pull together that diverse big tent that is the Democratic Party. And I think that's what we're trying to do here in Nevada, and I know that's what we're trying to do in South Carolina. I think I'm the last person other than Michael Bloomberg to get into this race. And I've still spent more time in Nevada than any other candidate, and I've spent more time in South Carolina than any other candidate. I really think it's about grassroots. I'm a grassroots person. I built one of the biggest grassroots organizations in the United States, Next Gen America, and I really believe in people being on the ground, the candidate being on the ground, and seeing people face to face.
You have said, because you were a hedge fund manager, that it makes you uniquely qualified, your experience, to have a positive economic impact as president. The Federal Reserve Chair testified this week that labor force participation, basically, the share of Americans who work is low, is happening because, and in a negative place, because of the opioid crisis and problems with the education system. Is that how you diagnose the problem?
Well, let me say this. Mr. Trump is a terrible economic president.
This was his Federal Reserve Chairman.
I understand that. I'm going to address the Federal Reserve Chairman's statements. But this has to do with Mr. Trump. He's running on the economy, but he's really running on a Mar-a-Lago economy where he's given big benefits to rich people and big corporations in the short run. What the Federal Reserve Chairman is talking about in terms of opioids and education is how you actually develop long-term prosperity and justice. And that is by investing in young people through education, specifically including universal pre-kindergarten, and by dealing with issues of health around the country, including the opioid crisis, including mental health. What Mr. Trump is doing is a very superficial, short-term juice to the economy through his pals at the Mar-a-Lago Country Club and other rich people. And he's avoiding the actual long-term prosperity of Americans that is done by investing in the American people, by making us productive over time, and that means education, health care for every American, a living wage. The wages of Americans are outrageously low. It's a completely different way of thinking, Margaret.
But when you talk about trying to even the playing field with reparations, something that you said you support, how do you repair it? Do you say that the divide is about education, or are you talking about financial restitution, writing checks?
Well, what I've said, Margaret, is this, and you're right. I am the only candidate running for president who will say that he or she is for reparations. But what I've also said is this. The way to figure out the correct solution in this case is I would have a formal commission on race starting the first day of my presidency, to retell the story of the more than 400 years that African Americans have been here in America, to tell the story not just of legalized injustice and cruelty, but also of the contributions that the African American community have made.
So you don't
to the
have a
building
specific
of America.
mechanism yet?
Well, correct. What I'm saying is this. In order to come up with solutions, you have to go through together and tell the story, because out of the narrative comes the policy changes.
Okay.
One thing I have said, Margaret, is that I would put $125 billion into the historically black colleges and universities, which have lost 42% of their federal funding over the last decade,
Okay.
and which have done a magnificent job over more than a century of being a lifeline for black kids to go to colleges and universities when the mainline schools are closed to them.
All right.
That's just an example. But the real idea is to come up with a solution together,
Right.
not to mandate one from the top.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Steyer, for your time. We'll be right back with our political panel, and they're on their way in as we speak.
Thank you, Margaret.
We will turn now to our panel for some political analysis. Amy Walter is national editor at Cook Political Report and host of The Takeaway. Eliana Johnson is editor-in-chief of the Washington Free Beacon. Paula Reid covers the White House for CBS News, and Ed O'Keefe is on the campaign trail for CBS. Good to have you all here. Ed, I didn't know that they allowed you back in Washington.
I didn't either, but here we are.
But that, I think, is the first sort of uplifting, so to speak, Bloomberg clip. There
Yep.
were a lot of really damaging things that his campaign had to respond to this week.
There really were, between, again, his past comments on stop and frisk and his support for it, about redlining, and of course all the issues that were, dealt with at Bloomberg News and Bloomberg LP back in the day. They were preparing for this, and I think it's telling when on a Sunday morning, Kellyanne Conway, Joe Biden, and Bernie Sanders are all in agreement that there's something wrong with Mike Bloomberg. And the problem is he's spending so much money and he's climbing in the polls. And his opponents on the Democratic side are terrified of what's coming, because he's either going to do well enough to accrue several delegates in these 14 Super Tuesday states, or it will have been seen as a foolish investment. But if it was so foolish, they wouldn't be so focused on him. And I think they know what's coming.
And there was one particular piece of audio tape that I want to play for our audience here, because to hear Michael Bloomberg saying it himself is another matter. Let's listen to Stop and Frisk.
95% of your murderers and murder victims fit one MO. You can just take the description, Xerox it, and pass it out to all the cops. They are male, minorities, 15 to 25. That's true in New York, it's true in virtually every city. And that's where the real crime is.
So Mayor Bloomberg has since apologized for this policy, and some on his campaign said he will just have to continue to do so.
Right.
How do you beat the tape, fight the tape, so to speak?
Well, he's got the ads going for him, and in fact, as we were sitting waiting to come on, we watched a number, I think at least two of them come on during this broadcast.
Amy Klobuchar said it was unconstitutional.
And the judge said it was unconstitutional, which is why they are not doing it anymore. Look, Democratic voters have been spending the last year telling us we want a candidate who can beat Donald Trump. And thus far, they have not found that candidate. They keep splitting among that group of candidates who's selling themselves as the most electable. And ultimately, those voters are going to have to decide, and this is what the Bloomberg campaign is counting on, is there's no perfect candidate. There's no candidate that hasn't had to apologize for things they've said or voted on or done. And so will you be willing, in the name of electability, be willing to overlook and get past someone's past? Or will you set a bar that's high enough that many of these candidates just are never going to make it?
Look, when I look at Michael Bloomberg, he reminds me of somebody who has achieved some measure of political success. He is a billionaire New Yorker who has switched parties and has said many impolitic and politically incorrect things that have offended women and minorities. he reminds me a lot of Donald Trump. And I think there may be some appeal. I don't think that these attacks will hurt him. What I do think we need to see, like we saw with Donald Trump, is how Bloomberg reckons with these attacks on a debate stage and on the campaign trail. And he has ducked that, and I do think that will hurt him if he doesn't start doing it.
And Paula, the president himself, not only does he have some of his advisors, as Ed indicated on the Sunday shows today, hitting out at Mike Bloomberg, he's been tweeting a ton about this candidate.
He took the bait, right? His advisors have been telling him, just ignore him. It doesn't matter. Focus. We got to focus on those suburban voters. We're going to try to get some black voters back, expand our electoral college chances. But he took the bait. And it's interesting, he took the bait not only taking shots at his height, but also on stop and frisk, which is amazing because for the past 7 years, the president has been tweeting his support for stop and frisk. So to now suggest that Mike Bloomberg is a racist because of what you heard on that tape, that's a remarkable strategy.
And I think that's part of the difference here is that Bloomberg has apologized. He's sought to distance himself. He has convinced black leaders in this country that he doesn't feel that way anymore. He's disavowed it. Plus, he's putting his money into causes that are clearly priorities to Democrats, whether it's the 10-year investment in Virginia to get Democrats for total control of state government that they now have, or into the Sierra Club and to Every Town for Gun Safety.
2018 congressional races.
Exactly. Democrats look at that and go, oh, he really has put his money behind this, unlike the other New Yorker, who is politically incorrect, who barely spends any of his own money, sets up charities that are clearly fraudulent. So, if people can see beyond that, then, perhaps Bloomberg will be just fine.
There was also tape today from an interview that Univision did. Jorge Ramos, an anchor there, pressed Joe Biden on the Obama administration immigration policies. I asked one of our guests earlier about it, the 3 million who were deported. And he was kind of on his heels in this exchange. Let's listen.
All the unaccompanied children were coming across the border. We tried to get them out. We kept them safe and get them out of the detention centers, that essentially that center, that were run by Homeland Security, and get them into communities as quickly as we can.
Many people would say they were cages.
Well, look, you're not telling the truth here about the comparison of the two things.
I'm saying that the numbers in your administration were not the same as the ones we're seeing right now with the Trump administration.
Beyond that, but look how quickly we got them out and got them back to families. Look how we didn't engage and we sought the relatives here. We sought to get them into safe communities. We sought to get them out of the control of Homeland Security, to get them safe, but they came unaccompanied.
And what you saw there in Jorge Ramos's hand was a picture of children in cages. This is something that President Trump has defended having done, saying they're not cages. His administration said they're cage-like structures. And oh, by the way, this happened during the Obama administration. Ramos had a picture showing it happened during the Obama administration. Is immigration a weak point for Joe Biden?
It could be, especially in Nevada. You have a younger, far more liberal base of Latino voters in that state who have felt the direct impact of immigration policies during the Obama and Trump years. He's trailing Bernie Sanders now among them. If this permeates over the next week, certainly it could create weaknesses. It is telling that he now calls it a mistake, having been confronted about it over the last several months by Julian Castro and some of his other opponents, having disregarded questions about it and batted them away. To now go to Nevada, where immigration is a far more pressing and relevant issue, and say so, I think is proof of how quickly the narrative of these primaries can change depending on the state you're in. He didn't want to discuss this in Iowa and New Hampshire. He'll happily discuss it now in Nevada.
I see it a little bit differently. I think the problem with Biden and immigration is his response to it. I think if he wanted to own that moderate lane, he should be vocally defending the Obama administration's policies on this by saying this is an endemic problem that multiple administrations, Democrat and Republican, have been dealing with it. We dealt with it the best we could. Trump's strongest supporters are on the issue of immigration. Biden needs to win some of those Obama-Trump voters back. And I think explaining and backpedaling and doing so in such a tentative way is a fail for him.
Well, he's got to win a primary first. And so now he can't afford to not say it's a mistake because he'll lose that primary.
But if you're running as, I'm going to return us to a pre-Trump era, it's going to be just like Obama. Remember me? I was the vice president under this guy. Then you're going to own all of that, and to have a better response is going to be very difficult. So you either are going to be the Barack Obama 2.0 or you're not.
Paula, on this program last week, Senator Lindsey Graham revealed that there was this channel.
Huge news.
To deliver information from Ukraine gathered by Rudy Giuliani on Joe Biden.
Exactly.
To directly to the Justice Department that is already investigating Rudy Giuliani. I feel like that story we kind of moved on from, but that in and of itself is tremendous, not just for Joe Biden saying the story's not going away, but what this says about what the Justice Department is doing.
That's so true. It was such huge news. The next day, the Attorney General had a press conference where he took one question before exiting the stage, and thankfully it was on this. And he confirmed that, yes, in fact, he has tapped a U.S. attorney to review whatever it is Rudy Giuliani brought back from Ukraine in that suitcase and any other information that people are gathering in Ukraine. And even though the Roger Stone case is what really brought to everyone's attention this week, the Justice Department, Bill Barr's role in using his stature to really bolster the president, the fact is this is one of several reviews. This is one of several U.S. attorneys who Barr has tapped specifically to look into one of the president's pet issues. He has a U.S. attorney in Connecticut reviewing, once again, the origins of the Russia probe. We now also have a review of politically charged cases in D.C., including Mike Flynn. And this is why right now there is a crisis of confidence within the Justice Department. There are concerns that the president's pet issues are getting a special look, and that, again, Barr is using his stature and his authority to help the president. He said this week, I don't need to be bullied. Well, yeah, you don't necessarily need to be bullied, but if you know all of these issues are important to the president, you're clearly giving them validity through these reviews while simultaneously receiving a criminal referral from the CIA and passing on it without even interviewing a single person.
Senator Kennedy said, oh, it's a matter of the president shouldn't be tweeting. But you're saying this goes far deeper than the Justice Department being upset by a tweet.
Absolutely. The crisis of confidence is not just about Roger Stone. It's not just about the Attorney General overriding career prosecutors and putting his opinion into that case and revising the sentencing recommendation. It's systemic. It's from the very beginning of his tenure. He came out and he framed the Mueller investigation's findings in a way that even Robert Mueller said wasn't accurate. And those are the big concerns within the Justice Department. Is the Attorney General putting his thumb on the scale to help the president either on these issues, giving them validity, even though there's very little expectation that any of these reviews will result in criminal charges. It's a huge concern among the rank and file, which is why Barr did that interview. You don't need to do an interview to tell the president something. He's talking to the public. He's talking to the rank and file because he knows the optics here are not good.
And Amy, you heard Senator Klobuchar talk about this because she has some oversight. You also had Senator Warren sign on to something calling for his resignation. You have a letter from 1,000 different prosecutors who've served under Republicans and Democrats saying this. Does this resonate outside of Washington? Because you're laying out a constitutional crisis here.
I think voters have been pretty clear since the very beginning of this administration about what they are expecting from this president, and quite frankly, it hasn't changed since the minute he was sworn in until now. The real question is what happens to those people, those voters who do feel cross-pressured. We're seeing them right now, people who say the economy is good. I think the president's doing a good job on the economy, but I don't like the job he's doing as president. Those are the folks, part of the reason why they're not giving Trump their vote or the stamp of approval of his presidency is because of things like this. So he's not losing his base over it, but he's not winning back those voters who he should be winning on the economy.
All right. Thanks to all of you for your analysis. We will be right back in a moment with a look at the humanitarian crisis in Syria. CBS News correspondent Holly Williams has been covering the conflict for us, and she joins us this morning from Istanbul. Holly, why are Russia and the regime attacking with such force?
Well, Margaret, for both the Syrian regime and its ally Russia, Idlib is really a fly in the ointment when it comes to achieving their strategic goals. What are those goals? Well, for the regime, it's regaining control of the country. And for Russia, I think it's really twofold. One, defending their own military bases in Syria, but two, really reasserting themselves as a true global power. And for all of those reasons, neither of them is willing to tolerate a rebel stronghold controlled by Islamist rebels, home to 3 million, maybe 4 million people, and sitting in northwestern Syria. And I think that this latest offensive is perhaps a sign that their patience is running out. They've been bombarding civilian areas for years, but the scale of what we've seen unfolding in the last few weeks is really staggering, and the conditions faced by the people forced to flee is staggering as well. Now, this is the Middle East, but it is the middle of winter, and at times it is bitterly cold. Many of the people fleeing are poor. They're carrying just a few possessions.
A top State Department official said this week that basically Russia's ignoring the U.S. I asked the president's national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, why the U.S. doesn't intervene. Here's what he said.
So the idea that America must do something, I just find that to be, I don't even see that as being a real argument. So you've got Russian and Iranian and Syrian troops attacking Turks and their allies, and by the way, there are terrorists in Idlib as well. And what are we supposed to do to stop that? We're supposed to parachute in as a global policeman and hold up a stop sign and say, stop this Turkey, stop this Russia, stop this Iran, stop this Syria.
Holly, is the rest of the world really this powerless?
Well, Margaret, the fact is that none of the diplomatic efforts to try and stop these assaults in Idlib have had any long-term success. And if the US were to intervene militarily in Idlib at this point, it would be extremely dangerous because the risk would be an all-out confrontation between the US and Russia. And part of the US calculus seems to have been that from the very beginning, the war in Syria looked as though it was going to be very bloody and very complicated, with a lot of different countries involved. And both of those things have turned out to be true. But Margaret, you know, when you talk to Syrians in places like Idlib, oftentimes they'll tell you that they hate the Syrian regime, they hate Russia, but they are also furious with the US for not having done more to defend them against the horrors of this war.
Holly Williams in Istanbul. Thank you. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Be sure to tune in to 60 Minutes tonight. Scott Pelley talks to a key witness in the House impeachment inquiry, the former top diplomat to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, in a fascinating piece about Ukraine and the 2016 election. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.